bist weg. Hallo, schön, dass ihr alle da seid. Ich freue mich sehr, dass der Raum so voll ist. Für alle, die da hinten noch reinkommen, es gibt da vorne noch 2 Plätze. Ja, hier auch, 2 noch, genau. Kommt sicher irgendwann zu spät, fände ich komisch, wenn niemand zu spät kommt. Ich habe die Aufträge bekommen, hier im Eck zu stehen, dass ich da irgendwie mit dabei bin. Schön, dass ihr da seid. Ich werde ein paar Punkte vorher sagen, bevor wir loslegen. Mein Name ist Niki Kubacek, ich bin Teil von Transversaltext, wo das Buch von Raúl, um das es heute geht, erschienen ist. Bevor ich jetzt hier die Rednerinnen kurz vorstelle, möchte ich mich, auch wenn es eine Formalie ist, tatsächlich sehr herzlich bedanken bei den Leuten und den Kontexten, die das mit ermöglicht haben. Es sind einige, deswegen habe ich es mir aufgeschrieben. Erstens Medico International, die waren von Anfang an dabei, haben die Übersetzung mitfinanziert. Es gibt da hinten Materialien, echt ein recht spannender Zusammenhang, so ein Mischmasch aus Aktivismus und NGO. Dann Transform Europe und hier natürlich insbesondere Katharina Anastasiou, die am Panel sitzt. Dann die Abteilung Bildung von der KPÖ. Hier insbesondere bei Martin Konečný, der da hinten ist und der dann mit mir gleich die Übersetzung vielleicht macht, oder da kommen wir gleich dazu. Die junge Linke, da sind glaube ich mehrere Leute involviert gewesen, die ich leider nicht namentlich kennengelernt habe, vielleicht kann man nachher noch quatschen. Tagebuch, auch ein ganz herzliches Dankeschön, auch an den Benjamin Bratko, der da ist, und das Samuel Stubfahrer und die Katja Wiedermoser, die auch hier ist. Dann die Abteilung Transkulturelle Studien von der Angewandten und die Nana Heidenreich, die hinten ist. Die Zeitung Malmö, das wird richtig lang, wenn man das da vorne macht. Zeitung Malmö, die auf euren Sesseln gelegen sind, hoffentlich jetzt nicht mehr auf dem Sessel. Und hier dem Theo Klug, der vielleicht zu spät kommt. Achso, nein, der ist woanders heute. Also, Salons Cook ist heute nachher für Afterparty. Und nicht zuletzt natürlich dem Depot, wo wir heute sind, dem Team vom Depot und der Sarah van Dordrecht. Und last but not least dem Institut für Politikwissenschaften der Universität Wien und dem Ulrich Brandt, der auch da ist. Besten Dank. Erste Frage. Die Veranstaltung wird in Englisch stattfinden. Braucht es eine Flüsterübersetzung ins Deutsche? Das ist keine rhetorische Frage, das ist tatsächlich eine ernste Frage. Wenn es das braucht, dann würde ich jetzt vorschlagen, wir rotten uns da hinten zusammen und der Martin und ich, wir werden euch abwechselnd übersetzen ins Deutsche.
Das wäre gut.
Das wäre gut. Dann bitte müssen wir uns was überlegen, dass wir das da hinten machen. Am besten mit dem Martin koordinieren. Dann würde ich Sie bitten, dass Sie aufstehen und sich nach hinten zum Martin setzen. Ist das möglich?
Ich werde es mal versuchen, wenn nicht, dann gehe ich nach hinten.
Ja? Sollen wir das so machen?
Ja.
Okay. Ja? Also gibt es die Möglichkeit und bitte unbedingt in Anspruch nehmen. Ja? Okay. Es gibt einen Büchertisch, Überraschung. Es gibt Büchertisch von Transversaltext. Es gibt die neuen Bücher von Raúl. Dieser Krieg endet nicht in der Ukraine. Argumente für den konstituierenden Frieden. Sowohl auch als das Absolute der Demokratie, auch ein Buch, das vor ein paar Jahren erst erschienen ist, und für den konstituierenden Prozess in Europa, das der Raúl zusammen mit Antoni Negri geschrieben hat, und noch mehrere spannende Bücher. Letzter Punkt auf dem ersten Papier ist der Livestream. Es gibt einen Livestream. Der Plan wäre auch, dass der nachher weiterläuft in der Diskussion. Aber die Kamera ist nur hier, stimmt das? Ja. Die Kamera ist nur hier. Das heißt, ihr könnt, was weiß ich, für wilde Slogans und Forderungen bringen und ihr werdet nicht identifiziert werden können. So, ich würde gern die Einleitung in den Abend beginnen mit einem kurzen Zitat. Und zwar, das lautet wie folgt: Es ist unsere Pflicht, in einen Kriegswirtschaftsmodus zu kommen. Koste es, was es wolle. So wurde der estnische Verteidigungsminister gestern im Ö1-Mittagsjournal zitiert und ich glaube, das ist ein ganz gutes Motto, um den heutigen Abend einzusteigen. Nicht als Spielverderber, sondern um sozusagen ein bisschen den Rahmen abzustecken, in was für eine Situation wir uns befinden und wogegen das Buch anschreibt und sozusagen auch die eröffnende Frage, wie kommen wir da raus, ne? Aus dieser Pflicht zur Kriegswirtschaft, als Pflicht zum Kriegsregime. Dafür darf ich jetzt vorstellen, die Katharina, die hier auf der einen Seite des Podiums sitzt. Sie ist die Leiterin des Bereichs Migration und globale Strategie bei Transform Europe. Transform Europe ist ein Netzwerk von 39 europäischen Organisationen aus 23 Ländern, die im Bereich der politischen Bildung und kritischen wissenschaftlichen Analyse tätig sind. Transform Europe ist die anerkannte politische Stiftung der Europäischen Linkspartei. Katharina ist in verschiedenen Basisgruppen in Österreich und Europa aktiv. Ihr Schwerpunkt liegt auf militanten Organisierungspraktiken und auf Fragen der Kommunikation. Seit 2018 organisiert sie einen transnationalen Dialog zu linken Sicherheitskonzepten. Raúl Sánchez Cedillo, auf der anderen Seite, ist Philosoph und hat sich seit Ende der 1990er Jahre als politischer Aktivist in Spanien für eine Neugründung Europas durch einen konstituierenden Prozess eingesetzt. Er ist Mitglied der Fundación de los Comunes, einem Netzwerk aus Bildungs- und Kulturinstitutionen, Medienprojekten und Einzelpersonen in Spanien, das unter anderem das Ziel hat, neue gesellschaftliche Institutionsformen zu erarbeiten. Und Raúl ist ebenso Mitglied der Universidad Nómada, die inspiriert von der italienischen Erfahrung der Autonomie gesellschaftliche Forschung und Wissensvermittlung organisiert. Sein Buch Das Absolute der Demokratie ist 2019 auf Deutsch bei Transversal Text erschienen und seine Aufsätze erscheinen seit ca. 20 Jahren im Webjournal Transversal. In der Zeit des Euromaidan 2014 bis 2016, dem Aufstand gegen die Janukowitsch-Regierung, war er in engen Kontakt mit unabhängigen künstlerischen und politischen Initiativen in der Ukraine. Sein Buch, um das es heute geht, Dieser Krieg endet nicht in der Ukraine, Argumente für einen konstituierenden Frieden, erschien gerade mal vor 2 Wochen, wie gesagt in Kooperation mit Medica International bei Transversal Text. Michael Grieder hat es im Eiltempo aus dem Spanischen übersetzt, das ist erst vor 2 Monaten oder so im Spanischen erschienen.
September, ja, Oktober.
Oktober? Ja, okay, ein bisschen länger. Es war trotzdem sehr stressig, habe ich mitgekriegt, obwohl ich zum Glück nicht übersetzen habe müssen. Es freut mich wirklich, dass Raúl da ist und dass das Buch auch da ist. Also ich war die ganze Zeit tatsächlich nicht sicher. In diesen letzten 2 Wochen fand nicht nur der bedrückende Jahrestag des russischen Angriffs in Österreich, um gemeinsam nach Wegen zu suchen, dem Kriegsregime, und das heißt wohl nicht zuletzt dem Blockdenken und den kriegerischen Pflichten, die dieses Denken mit sich bringt, zu entkommen. Raúl war vor kurzem noch in Berlin, in Frankfurt am Main, in Jena, im Wuppertal, in Köln und erst vorgestern bei den Freundinnen im Forum Stadtpark in Graz. Heute, das ist mir erst recht spät aufgefallen, ist der letzte Tag seiner Tour, eine Tour auf der Suche nach Auswegen aus dem im Entstehen begriffenen Kriegsregime und eine Tour nach den Möglichkeiten eines, wie er schreibt, nicht naiven, sondern wachen Pazifismus, eines konstituierenden Friedens von unten. Zu diesem Abschlusstermin, der sicher nicht der letzte Termin auf dieser Suche sein wird, möchte ich Raúl und Katharina
ein paar Wörter noch auf Deutsch über das Strukturelle dieses Abends und ich werde dann auf Englisch umsteigen, weil wir werden die Diskussion auf Englisch haben. Es sollte jetzt einmal so laufen, für die nächsten 50 Minuten maximal wird es eher ein Dialog zwischen mir und Raúl sein und irgendwann nach diesen 50 Minuten öffne ich dann sozusagen das Mikro für alle, die Fragen haben, Kommentare und die Diskussion. Kennen wir uns? Ist es soweit so gut? Ja, also wie bei allen gesitterten Diskussionen höflich bleiben, nicht der kriegerische Diskussionswahn I hope we're going to have a very good discussion today. From what I see, we have a quite diverse representation of the left and anti-capitalist spectrum in the room, so I'm pretty sure we're going to have a good discussion. Let's kick it off with a very basic question. How did it come to this book?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Katerina. Thank you to the audience and the organizers of this event. I decided that it was a good idea to write a book just, I would say, between the eve of the invasion of Ukraine and the following days. I immediately wrote an article about it, focusing on one of the dimensions that I think this in parallel counts at itself as not only a main reason to want to stop this war and to end this catastrophe, which is the relationship between war, historical relationship between war machines, and processes of fascistization. But of course, that wasn't enough, because at the same time, the war exploded, or it was initiated in a conjuncture that was the conjuncture of the post-pandemic situation, the post-pandemic world. As we all know, the post-pandemic or the pandemic proved the incompatibility of capitalist neoliberal modes of governance, of production and reproduction and life, and the sustainability, psychic, physical, and democratic societal sustainability of life and the ecosystems. It was the final test, so to say, in the sense that political systems, institutions weren't able to put life on the forefront and then act accordingly in order to do whatever was necessary to alleviate the effects of the pandemic. As we know, not only pharma companies, of course, private health companies, politicians, corporations, I mean, all public institutions in most of the countries, I would say, except for China, in a way, did nothing to stop the production of profit, the production of power, the production of capital accumulation and property, to stop that. And the result was clear, in the sense that not only the conditions to avoid another pandemic weren't met, weren't avoided, but also the inequality, the power and capital accumulation across the world was even larger than ever. And it was the time, as we know, of a new questioning of neoliberal capitalist modes of governance. Again, neoliberalism is dead. We need a Green New Deal. We need to rebuild educational health systems and so on. And what does it mean? We need the activation of social struggles, because it won't come deus ex machina. It won't come from the magnificent will of, corporate power or establishment politicians. The talk about the Green New Deal means, as we know, class struggle, as it was. It was an attempt to use class struggle as something relatively controlled into the production of surplus value and the redistribution of it, and the improvement of the then, in the 30s, working class, because there were twin dangers, fascism and communism. That was the urgency to do it. Of course, in spite of the fact that any reformist approach is accused of communism, the elites know perfectly that there is no communist threat in sight yet. So they did nothing. absolutely nothing. But in a preemptive way, I think that the escalation or the building of this process that led to the Russian invasion, as we will see later, was of course a decision to avoid that passage of dealing with social protests, with the possibility of political revolutions and revolts and transformation of the structures of power and accumulation. And that's what led me to think, of course, this is it, in the sense of a tipping point. So the main motivation to write the book was, I would say, a sense of urgency, but also because urgency might be confused with fear, might be confused with despair. No, it is urgency, but also the sense of, the word kairos, or in actual current Greek,
Yes.
Kairos. Kairos is the weather in contemporary Greece, but it has the meaning in classical, Greek thought of ceasing, rise to the occasion. Rise to the occasion because precisely we are, and we will see later, means the Vorspiel to a transformation of capitalist modes of governance in the sense of war regimes and war-led cycles of growth and growth of power, property, and so on. And a new way of dealing with what we'll see, the challenges that were already there. The food crisis, the climate crisis, the global inequality crisis, and of course, the destruction after the Iraq war of the international order. And that urgency means that we might be in time to diffuse, to sabotage that process. And that's the kairos, in the sense that it's a process that is absolutely full of contradictions, full of paradoxes, full of unexpected developments that we need to see, to profit from, to intervene in that sense of destructing the war regime and the war effort elsewhere and across the lines, and being able to build a transnational world alternative to this late period of capitalism. I'm finishing. In the book, I define the situation created by the event of the invasion, by the unleashing of the war, as a tipping point of the Capitalocene. As you know, the Capitalocene considered as the world ecosystemic period marked by developments in the biosphere and the ecosystem and nature and the web of life, as Jason W. Moore says, marked by the capitalist colonial warmongering creation of a world system. And this is a tipping point in the sense, as in the climate science, there is a talk of tipping point, the six main tipping points, in the sense that it's open a new realm of developments, of events that are marked by the centrality of war as a mode of domination of societies, of labor forces, of ecosystems, and the contradictions between the different, of course, regional and continental capitalist formations. So urgency and Kairos.
Very nice. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. The title of the book is "The War Doesn't End in Ukraine." Inside the book, you start already with Ukraine, describing the arguments also in the first part of, let's say, the status quo in promoting participation in this war, but also leaving a window open, like also Nikki said in the introduction. There are multiple paradigms, examples for that. kind of this mechanism preparing society for more war. But still, why did you choose this title?
The title?
Yeah.
Well, it is a statement. It's not clickbait because I don't see it in the bestseller list yet. It is about the fact that this war cannot end in Ukraine because we cannot understand this war if we don't take into account several elements. On the one hand, the three dimensions of this war. In order to understand it, we have to consider those three dimensions in their interaction, intertwining, and inextricability. By the way, this is something that a warmonger, a former, or maybe he considers himself to be a leftist, but to me he's an ex-leftist war journalist and writer, Paul Mason, he described it that way, and I was thinking along those lines, and I think we think the same, but from a contrary position. It is to say that this war is, on the one hand, it is, of course, a war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, the Ukrainian state. In that sense, it is a violation of the United Nations Charter. It is a crime from the point of view of international law. And it has, of course, this imperialist dimension. In order to understand that only that first dimension, we have to go back to the whole history of modern Ukraine, in the sense that Ukraine as a territory has always been a divided nation, has always been prey, and that's something that Trotsky, you read Trotsky's writings, because you remember that Trotsky was an Ukrainian Jew, revolutionary. On Ukraine, he says that Ukrainian national question has been unsolved because always has been prey to other interests. It's been always a pivot state, a proxy state because of several dimensions. Of course, its plurality, its geographical situation as a sort of limes, no? A threshold, no? Schwelle in between Orient and the Western world, because of the historical migrations, and contemporarily because it was a non-autonomous independent polity that which territory belonged to several imperial formations, mainly the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian subject that supposedly is able to create a polity, a nation state. From the point of view of the capacity of building that state, it was always a failure. It happened in 1917, 1918, when the first Ukrainian republics, first the Kiev Republic of Simon Petliura and others, that was, we might say, a middle-class, petit bourgeois approach to it from the point of view of a rather Western Ukrainian language-based project for the Ukrainian nation, but at the same time there were several other republics, the republics, Soviet republics of the East and the South, in Kharkiv, in Odessa, and others, and they were all in a civil war at the same time. There were 5 armies during that period clashing, including the Makhno anarchist army that wanted no state whatsoever, but just it was a revolutionary machine that wherever they went, they would revolutionize and defend. They were fighting against others, except for temporal alliances with the Bolsheviks and so on. But it only ended after another Ukrainian tragedy, millions of dead people, terrible pogroms, because anti-Semitism is a key in the Ukrainian situation from ever. Then we will also during the Second World War. But it ended in 22 with the constitution of the Soviet Ukraine, Socialist Soviet Republic of Ukraine. And that tragedy was sort of neutralized by the Soviet experiment, but it restarted again, of course, during the Stalinist collectivization with the Holodomor, and then, of course, with the Barbarossa operation that saw from one part of the Ukrainian nationalism, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, of Bandera and others, an episode of 2 years collaboration with the Wehrmacht and the SS. And we know the results of it. So this, of course, was defeated by the results of the Second World War. And as we know, there was a certain stabilization of the Ukrainian polity in its plurality, in its tensions, until the demise or the great stagnation of the Brezhnev period. And then with Gorbachev, as we know, Chernobyl and stuff, there was a total of the whole Soviet sphere, and that affected Ukraine a lot. The result of the end of the Soviet Union was a divided nation again, that suffered the same oligarchic experiment promoted by the West through the shock therapy that happened in Russia, the plundering and devastation of human and natural forces and industrial and educational, cultural achievements and institutions. But contrary to what happened in Russia, that this chaotic period of Yeltsin and the oligarchs that ended, of course, with that human and cultural tragedy, but also with the 98 default of payments by the Russian state, ended with the stabilizations provided by Putin and his friends. I mean, the Siloviki, the men coming from the forces, Sila forces in Russian, coming from the several armed and police intelligence services that created this stabilizing coalition between oligarchs that should abide to the needs of stabilization and sustainability of the Russian formation, and of course being able to plunder and do profits and extract natural resources and exploit people and create great masses of wealth in relation with the world market, but on the basis of that authoritarian rule. That didn't happen in Ukraine because the division was there, so there was a creation of oligarchs, the same plundering that led Ukraine to be the second poorest country in Europe until now, only over Moldavia, because of the devastation created by this shock therapy and the devastation that was indebted to the IMF and World Bank. It only quadruplicated in the sense that they indebted themselves even more during this independence period. So that division has been always a constant, and the division is the key to understand the impossibility of an Ukrainian independent polity. What we have to understand is that after the Euromaidan, the result of the Euromaidan was the beginning of a civil war in Ukraine, because mostly a majority of people fighting in Kyiv and other cities on the basis of a national front, which means that all forces and Nazi forces, the private sector and others. This is a national front that is still at place and is on the basis of the common war effort. On the other side, we had the pro-Russian structures, oligarchic, trade union, cultural, related to a Russian-speaking area historically, from the beginning, even of the Russian industrialization in Mariupol and other places. Those were rich industrial places. The paradox is that the dominant Ukrainian nationalism is not based on the workers' movement tradition, because the workers were in the east. They were in Donetsk. They were in the shipbuilding cities. They were in Odessa. They were in Sevastopol. So the paradox is that the workers' culture and the labor movement culture has never been nationalist from the point of view of exclusion of the Russian dimension, be it linguistic and culture. There is this reactionary dimension of the, some authors speak of a Galician matrix of Ukrainian nationalism that explains that that lasting division, because of course the destruction of the industry and mining in the Donetsk and even the siderurgic factories in Mariupol and so on, created a decomposition of that workers' culture and also a reactive pro-Western part of society. And when the war started, of course, it's been very few people had paid attention to the consequences of that war. Myself and others, we were since 2018, because of the cycle of struggles of 2018, we were already in contact and in relationship with all the European networks. Also networks from the Maghreb, because it happened in Egypt, it happened in Tunis, it happens elsewhere. But mostly with the European networks. So we organize several European or transnational meetings, Agora 99, maybe you remember some of a good deal of Polish and Ukrainian activists. It also happened that we organized great meetings or great forums with the support of the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid. One of them was the new adaptation of Europe. New adaptation of Europe, in the sense that Europe was already heading to a catastrophe of the European project in the sense of peaceful, anti-fascist, anti-militarist project, in the sense that because of the growth of reactionary forces, because of the unstoppable advancement of neoliberal policies about everything, already health issues, education, and so on, because of the reactionary nature and colonial nature of the border regime in Europe, and then the governance and reality of migration flows, of labor force, and so on, we were heading towards a neo-colonial Europe, a neo-apartheid Europe that was already in the making, and we should avoid it. In the days we were holding this conference, the Crimea invasion happened. And that was the beginning of the point of separation with those components of the Ukrainian comrades and activists, of many of them. Because for them, it was the beginning of a war. It was the beginning of a war against Russia, a war that would signal the destiny of Ukraine and the possibility of being finally free. And mostly we lost contact, not just because of that, but mostly because we were also very busy trying to end the Spanish monarchy and the Spanish oligarchy, as you know, still didn't happen. But there was this, the war acted already as a factor that cut the relationship with the Eastern activists, because apparently we were fighting for a similar Europe in the sense of a anti-liberal, anti-fascist, feminist, queer, migration-friendly Europe. And that ended, and as we can witness now, that national front started to to build, in the sense that they became part of the Ukrainian civil war on the side of the, say, pro-Western of Kiev government. And that dimension is difficult to grasp if we don't take into account that at the basis of it, the forces training and pushing to that result, there is also an inter-imperialist conflict, in the sense that the reality, as I have mentioned before, of the post-Soviet world is a reality of a space of power and capital accumulation. It is on the papers, it is what I would term a forensic truth, the shock therapy, that it was called like that by the authors of the therapy, Jeffrey Sachs and others. We needed shock therapy because we have to create, the sooner the better, capitalism, markets, civil society, pro-capitalist civil society, because otherwise there will be resistance. It has to be a shock, and a shock it was. That created, of course, the awakening of the non-communist forces, unleashed neoliberalism and reactionary nationalism. And those are the leading forces in Eastern Europe, by the way. Now, so from the point of view of the projects, from the point of view of the actual interventions on the Ukrainian political life, we cannot understand the discourse to war without that inter-imperialist conflict. Between whom? Between, of course, the Western, in inner contradiction, but the Western European Union, US, UK, Atlantic capitalist colonial formation, and of course the Russian Federation, as what in the book I rely a lot on Wallerstein, Delugian, Kagalitsky, and other theorists that have spoken of the Russian problem as a problem of a semi-peripheral power that has always, since Peter the Great on, striving to be part of the center, to become one of the centers of the world system, never achieving it because, of course, of the nature of the world division, world system division since the beginning of colonial Euro-centric capitalism, but also because of the fact that historically only class struggle, only the labor movement has been able to the basis of the dialectic of class struggle to be able to create an industrial society with the general intellect, so to say, able to become part of a very productive, from the point of view of capital, but also from the point of view of productive forces, that kind of society. The model for this attempt, Russian attempt, has always been fossil extraction, raw materials, authoritarian rule, and import of technology, import of knowledge, but never endogenous production of that knowledge. It changed during the Soviet Union, we must say. That was maybe the possibility. In a way, it became the center, one of the centers of the world system. After the demise of the Soviet Union, it got back, as we know. And that's the problem with Russia. It's only gas, oil, weapons, rusty weapons, and quite a lot of need of importing chips and everything. So the Putin project, so to say, is an attempt through force, through violence, through threat, nuclear threat, also to get back to that central position in a country that, as we know, from the point of view of gross domestic product, is like Italy, or more or less, if I remember well. So, but this is not enough. The third dimension that makes this war absolutely unsolvable from the point of view of the capitalist developments, diplomatic or what interstate developments, is the fact that it is used by the US as an hegemon after Yalta, and a hegemon, as we know, that is put into because of the also technological power, and so on, but also because of the resistance to accept a hegemony that has been accompanied by war, destruction, imperialism, and dictatorship across the world, as we know. It is the attempt, or also the kairos for the US, as we are seeing since the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis, to, on the one hand, submit Europe as a political possible alternative hegemon or intermediate hegemon, submit again Europe to the Atlantic dimension dominated by them, and also to coral, isolate China as, as something that should give up, should surrender, or avoid at least the possibility of a non-unipolar world. And I think that this is the dimension that makes this war absolutely unsolvable, except for, not only unsolvable, but a war that doesn't end in Ukraine, that is absolutely bound to expand in one way or another, or even fall into a nuclear catastrophe. But that's a probability that is still tiny, but grows every day. But in any case, in a completely human and ecological catastrophe. But those three dimensions are accompanied, that we have to take also this into account by what I use the term ecosystemic chaos, in the sense that precisely these convulsions of hegemony in the world system have created what already Arrighi and Silver spoke of in 1999 as systemic chaos in the world system. But they didn't take into account at that point the global warming problem and the devastation across the world, the food problem, the water problem, the finitude of the planet, in a word. And that finitude, that finite characteristic of the ecosystem, planetary ecosystem, is something that, as we know, capitalism has no way to deal with, that has to deny. And war is also a way of dealing with that, with the denial of the finitude of the planet by means of sheer domination, sheer destruction. As we know, destruction is a way of creating the conditions for new accumulation. Destruction of dead labor is dead capital, fixed capital is the condition to a new wave of accumulation. But on the basis of the denial, and the denial means that there is no, as we've said, no cheap nature anymore, no cheap labor anymore, no cheap food anymore, and we have to distract, exterminate, eliminate in order to be able to have a great chunk of the pie. The other dimension that I think is parallel, as I was saying at the beginning, is that historically we cannot understand fascism if not as a result of the development of war machines and war totale Mobilmachung, and the effects, one of them, because we know all the rest, the Dolchstoßlegende, the anti-communism, the nationalism, the colonial aspects, and so on. But there is one that is key and is related to the war experiences, to the Erlebnisse. We know Junger, we know that this spiritual transformation, the discovery that war machines have something not only hot about them, the passion related to destruction and the assemblage of machines and humans in a destructive, full and total power machine that is able to realize the technique, no? The whole reflection of Heidegger relates also to this, to the power of technique that we should use to destroy our enemies of the authenticity of the folk, and so on. And this dimension didn't end with the First World War. It developed and even conquered conquer the world, the European world. It developed through, for instance, in Germany, with the alliance between the Freikorps and the SPD in order to crush revolution, which gave them a total legitimacy. It happened in Italy, it happened in Spain. We cannot understand Spanish fascism without the colonial African wars and the experiences they brought from the new comradeship, the new warrior experience, and that's related not just to values, to ideas. It is related to the power of war machines. Not just war machines, because if we speak of now, not just war machines as weapons, but also the fact that the networks, the internet, the platforms are transformed into war machines. The alt-right operates like that, not just to distract people emotionally, personally, trans people, black people, and so on, but also, of course, as we know, tools of surveillance. Elon Musk has been using Starlink for the interoperability of the operations in Ukraine. So any machine can be turned now into a war machine. And the fascination, the passion, the erotic, we might say, the pleasure that comes out of it is a thriving force of fascism. And since we are entering, already we are in, but we are entering in a war regime, in a war-led growth regime, as we know. I mean, it's something we are witnessing. This means that this war is creating the best ecosystem worldwide for the breeding and the growth of those new fascist formations. I mean, is creating the best conditions, be it during or after the war, as it happened in First World War, to a fascist hegemony from the point of view of the contagion, the hegemony of affects, emotions, and such. It is very, really awful, terrible to witness how, liberal pundits and democratic civil society forces, Greens, and so on, talk the language of extermination, talk the language of total enemy, talk the language that we have to defeat the Russians so they don't get up in 50 years, or President Zelensky said we have to crush them, and in the United States, everywhere else, it is the same as we see in Russia. We have to teach a lesson to the Ukrainians. We may use the nuclear weapon. This is the building. This is the ecosystem, not just fascistization, but tolerance to fascistization. I'm finishing. We see also in the legitimation on both sides of fascist armies. On the one hand, Wagner and others, Azov and others. And those sides, both are national heroes. Both are the models to follow. And this is in itself a reason to see this process, this war, as something that is, this signals a tipping point of our contemporary era, at something that must be stopped and destroyed at any cost.
Thank you very much, Raúl. I think Ukraine and the war now and the contemporality, you continue embedding this war in the machinery of wars, but then you come with a message at the end, or more or less a call, a proposal, a proposal for an exit. So let's talk a little bit about this. You propose constituent peace. Now explain it to us, please.
Well, I mean, we could say it's constituent peace because it talks of ending the war, but at the same time rebuilding societies and political orders. That's constituent power, no? In the modern revolutionary sense. It is a way of talking about we need a revolution, the same way, but even with greater challenges, we need it after 1914. As you know, 1914 ended the Second International, the biggest international organization and the biggest labor movement organization that only months before conjured and promised to themselves that we won't fight between proletarians, that we will fight our bourgeoisies, we will fight national. They did exactly the opposite thing. And that was the possibility that allowed that catastrophe. The labor movement failed. And so it is time to, in spite of the fact that we don't have any labor movement as such, but to go back to labor as something that is the main force that can sabotage war. But what is labor now? Labor is life as an activity, is assemblages of bodies and ecosystems. That's today labor in the sense of lebendige Arbeit, in the sense of productive and reproductive forces of wealth. Okay? And that's what precisely contemporary capitalism is all about. It's not just factory exploitation, it's not just land dispossession, it's also mind colonization, it's also algorithmic production of interactions between people, and abstract labor in the Martian sense that is absolutely computable and I mean in terms of when we speak of big data, that's precisely the surplus value of the millions and millions of interactions of people that creates enormous wealth for corporations, but also in terms of knowledge. That's its key for any capitalist operation today. So on the basis of that definition of labor, it is about the recreation of a transnational modes of organizations able to sabotage, on the one hand, the war effort, to overthrow any government that continues to push for war, and the repression of its citizens, because of course, I insist, the war is at the same time what is happening in the battlefield and in the relationship between states, but at the same time internally, domestically, we are seeing the installation of a war regime, the installation of the logic of war, friend and foe, in our societies. And we know, you know what I'm talking about. You are a Putin-Versteher, or you are an imperialist, and blah, 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 whatever you say, because it has to be either this or that. If you are against the war, you are a Putin-Versteher, of course. If you don't want the extermination of the Ukrainians, you are a Western imperialist, and so on. And that's, of course, it's been always like that. But today, it's even worse, because it has colonized, from the point of view of these colonizations of minds, the internet, the public sphere, and it has absolutely paralyzed the anti-militarist and left forces. The left is being divided between both sides. It's no left anymore, I'm sorry, because left is against war and such wars under any circumstance, and in any case critical of war. We may discuss that later, but this is about not just creating a very new kind of thing. It's about assembling any possibilities of struggle, be it in the climate, be it in anti-patriarchal, anti-fascist initiatives about communication, initiatives about, of course, labor rights, land rights, indigenous rights, of course, into a class definition. Class, and I consider myself a bit a Marxist, is something that is the product of struggle. There is no class without struggle. It's just sociology, it's just distributional groupings. Class is political, class is institutional, class is something that creates another universe. another temporality, another world vision that is breaking with the dominant one. And that's why we speak of class, because it has to be the union of a multiplicity, the union in terms of agency, in terms of coexistence, in terms of sympathy, in spite of conflicts, differences, of course, of a antagonistic force to the capitalist colonial war modes of domination. And this is absolutely, as I said at the beginning, urgent and opportune. And I think that the contradictions that this war regime and war effort is creating allow us to attempt. We have to, because otherwise it is already in the making, and well, it's not something I have to stress on or insist like a preacher. Democracy as something that is about counterpowers, conflict, productivity of struggles, security and safety of lives and people is gonna end, is ending. So it is the same urgency as the beginning of the 20th century. But there is also something about this constituent peace that has to do with, of course, the creation of this multitude as class, in the sense that it has to deal with the differences and break with the hierarchizations and relationship of power, because it's about race, it's about gender, it's about coloniality, it's about relationship between different animal and human species, and so on and so on. And it has to produce something that is the very object of the revolution, which is a new mode of production. And that's why in the book I speak of communism, of course. But communism is today defined as the political institution and the ecosystems. And that, realm of production, that dimension of production is what we call the common. Communism is defined as the self-government of the production and reproduction of the common. And what is the common? Is the result of struggles, centuries of struggles and transformation of societies, cultures, and capacities of cooperation between humans across the countries, and humans and ecosystem and other species. It is about, of course, knowledge, it is about technique, but not in the Enlightenment point of view, but from the point of view of production of modes of life that are not based on exploitation, enslavement, destruction of the ecosystems, and so on. And that dimension is mature in order to avoid the contradictions that's common as a duality of labor forces and ecosystem against capitalism necessarily creates. In order to dominate and produce surplus value, you have to destroy productive capacities. You have to enslave, you have to depress, you have to kill, you have to rape, you have to torture. Those are the anti-productive conditions of capitalist accumulation and property accumulation. And the common is the goal of this anti-war dimension. It is constituent because it has to do with changing our democracies, overthrowing the dictatorships, because democracies of property, democracies that, as we saw during the pandemic, put profit, property, and power before the conservation and protection of human life, is incompatible with the common, is destructive of the common. So democracies of property, the oligarchic democracies like our democracies today, have to be transformed, we might say. But that's another point. Is it a reformist process still possible? I don't think so. I don't think so. That was maybe an opportunity that, as I said, opened up after the pandemic. Remember, we need to protect health, education, and everything. Von der Leyen, and what happened to von der Leyen? That she turned into a civilizational warmonger. She says, at stake at this war is not only Ukraine, is recollecting civilization, energy, ecological transition, everything good in this world. And who is wanting to destroy it and steal it from us? The barbarians, the jungle, as Borrell says, the non-civilized peoples. And it has to be won, because that is part of our civilized project. So we have to also go for China. And they go for China also, because both NATO, in June in Madrid, they had the summit, and the National Defense Strategy of Washington, the last one, they both defined China as the main adversary. The main, so Russia is a step. Regime change in Russia is a step towards that goal. And there is no reformist. I mean, reformist in the sense of elections, a new government, and legislative change and so on. No, they are already at war against that possibility. So something like a Maidan from that point of view, but a Maidan against the war and for the common, and that's the constituent aspect of it. It cannot be only national, it should be transnational. It's not only about the statewide level, it may happen in a neighborhood, in a municipality, in a region. It is about accumulation, interconnection, and growth of that network of counterpowers that may be able to gain, gather force, and able to sabotage and destroy the war and capitalist apparatuses. I think that this is in a way already happening. I mean, accident product of the privatization of that public fundamental structure in France against Macron, a great ally and Democrat guy, that wants to destroy the pension system in France and make people work from 62 to 68 or even more. In the UK, around the railway workers, but it's not just trade union struggles. We see that the common is operating there because everybody in the struggle understands that that struggle is the struggle of all, and that we have to gather force to oust those criminals. But of course, we need this enormous conversation, alliances and victories in order to be able to gain force and to be able to really do harm to war. But at the same time, we shouldn't lose the perspective of peace. And this is tricky, no? Because as we know, there are also pro-Putin forces that are talking about peace. But the worst mistake would be to leave them the peace movement, the peace effort. We have to battle for it. Peace, saying we want peace and revolution, we want peace and transnationalism, we want peace and emancipation, anti-colonial, we want peace with no fascist and no racist. And that's also a battle, because they are also adversaries. And I think we cannot let the peace movement to those kind of compositions. We have to battle, but at the same time, peace movements are not enough. Peace has to be linked to general strikes, has to be linked to civil disobedience in climate interventions and so on and so on. It has to be linked to the building of new media with whatever we have at hand to create a different internet, be it low tech or whatever, because we cannot rely anymore on the internet. As we know, it is already weaponized. It at any moment can be cut out, there can be a blackout, And at the same time, we are completely surveyed. We are absolutely geolocalized, parameterized about anything we do. And we have to be off the grid, but without the possibility of connecting and communicating. We need a certain civil, non-militarist clandestinity, because otherwise we cannot surprise, we cannot be unpredictable. And if there is something that...
Thanks. Raúl, actually, I know my time plan totally blew out and is scattered as confetti right now, but there's still one question that I want to ask you before we go to the public and we start interacting with the room. I mean, question, I cannot wait to hear it, because, you know, the situation is gloom, the ways out are not clear, we have a compass, but we don't know exactly what to do, but still also in our discussions preparing this today, and also in your book, you call to not accepting fear, not accepting this catastrophology. You I would like to hear your thoughts on why we should not succumb to the catastrophological environment that surrounds us, both in terms of things happening around us and information you just mentioned looming throughout the net. And it also, of course, connects to the most at least in my view, the most important struggle of our time, which is to save this planet so we are able to breathe and reproduce ourselves at some point. So why not? Why we shouldn't get tricked into...
Fear is always been the tool of great powers, domination through fear. Hobbes, no? The great theorician of the absolute state, says that you have to operate with fear. Fear of the future, fear of the other, fear of death, and so on. But of course, this is clear, but there is a new ambivalent dimension in the way that, for instance, also the environmental movements use fear, no? The collapses. There's going to be a collapse. We are the last generation, and so on. And I think that's a total mistake, because as I was saying, there is something not in the sense that there is a desire for catastrophe, an anticipation of catastrophe as a moment of truth. So there is a fascination and a love of catastrophe. And also at the unconscious level, I think that many people that are not fascists are really thrilled by the possibility of assisting to the end of the world. So you get paralyzed. You don't do nothing. You consider it as something, as a fate. And that's, you might mobilize people through fear, but not as autonomous, emancipated people, but rather as people with fear, as a flock, of course, as sheep. And I think it might be, in the short term, something that, as we see, because is tip, but it's not effective for emancipation. It's exactly a hinder that hinders emancipation. So there is this ecological aspect that of mental ecology about this situation, war, the climate transition, the uncertainty, insecurity, that we have to combat, and we have to do a certain clinical analysis and self-analysis of how do we see and how do we experience the situation. Not to deny insecurity, not to deny the dangers, but to put at the center the collective capacity of resisting, of avoiding the worst, of limiting the worst. And that's not about asking the powers that be to save us. It is about reappropriating of our own power, of our own collective force, in order to be ready to avoid the worst. The worst, not just in terms of climate of global warming effect, but there was also in terms of, as I've been saying, authoritarian governments, civil wars, political and societal catastrophes. Fear is a contagious virus, and we cannot divide between good and bad fear. Fear instills fear, and we cannot do emancipatory politics with that. And that's something that I use in the book, of course, relying on Félix Guattari's book, the three ecologies, that we need to interrelate the mental ecology, the societal ecology, that would be, of course, class struggle in the traditional sense, and environmental ecology. We cannot deal with the climate transition, we cannot deal with the mental catastrophe that we've been suffering, and we will be suffering because of the accumulation of war and everything, without class struggle, without collective power, without trust, without the feeling that we are together and we can cooperate, we can help each other, care of each other. And those dimensions have to be constantly going back and forth. Yeah.
Fluid with each other. Thank you. Thank you very much, Raúl. I would propose now that you can clap. We open the floor to the audience. Perhaps there are questions or comments, or let's have a discussion all together. Except if you're very shy, we can also call it a day, but I think there should be people in the room I will be willing to discuss. Nikki, and back there, and then Epps, and Martin.
I would be super interested to hear a bit more on the difference between what is a kind of like an awake pacifism and like a naive pacifism. Like, what does it mean concretely? Naive. Like how you, like, it would be nice to hear a bit more what this implies for you. Thanks. And thank you.
Then over there, maybe we collect a couple, no? And you, please.
Thank you very much for this Vortrag. I agree with you in a lot of points, especially in this development of capitalism and imperialism, and which makes us this block thinking of either this side, we have to take this side or this side. And I just want to say some numbers that I heard about the last year about the development of capitalism. Last year, I heard that the military funds worldwide were more than 2,000, also more than 2,000 Milliarden, also 2 Billionen, I don't know in English.
2 trillion.
2 Billionen, also 2000 Milliarden, und 1500 Milliarden wurden an die Aktionäre ausgeschüttet. Also das heißt, 1.5 billions were given to the richest people. So at the same time, the chef of World Food Program, who is a Republican actually, said that it would need 40 Milliarden of dollars, billions, until 2030 to get rid of hunger. So this is where we've come to. And so this system is leading us to the complete catastrophe, I think. And could you somehow, because of it, like in 1940, when also the social democracy was very much under pressure, could you get again contact? Did you get a? Could you talk about these topics, or still on the national side? Are they still on the national side? Because what I heard is that also working conditions, and Zelensky, he really made a lot worse the situation for workers. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Then, okay, let's take Martin because he's closer to the mic, and then Epps.
Thank you. So my question is, you talked a lot about connecting the struggle for peace with the struggle for like ecological ecological struggles, feminist struggles, worker struggles, and so on. So my question would be, who is the actor, the subject that connects the struggles? Is this the party form? Is there another form? Who does this work of connecting the different struggles in this conjecture?
Empts.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to mention some points that I see extremely missing right now at where we are as a leftist, progressive, anti-capitalist, whatever movement here, where we are right now. Like on the one hand, a perspective of, in a way, combining force against the war machine here in the so-called Western world, the formation of fascism, the formation of destructive neoliberalism, and so on, with relating in a positive or in a progressive or in a revolutionary way also two forces of resistance in parts of the world that are dominated, like in Russia, by the Russian regime and the formation of reaction and war machine there. So there is few points of such connections that I see right now. And also a perspective that is extremely missing, I would say, to relating to progressive forces of change in the global south, also taking into consideration, like if in Niger or in Mali, where there is among most people no belief at all in those Western promises of we are defending democracy and the necessity to rally behind the West against Russia and so on. There and yeah, but there's really a lack of perspective how to connect to views on the present world situation in the global south.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ebt. I see another hand. I see, yeah, back there. And then we make a stop so Raúl has the chance to engage.
I have two questions. The first one is, how would you comment on the movement of Miss Wagenknecht in Germany? Some call it Querfront. I don't know the right English expression. What's your comment on this? And the second question is maybe, you said that there might be just no reform solution. And my question is, in this event, the two blocs are getting more and more militarized. What's a revolutionary perspective when there's just a world war coming on? So where's the revolution in this scenario?
Not fighting.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Nikki's question is quite difficult in the sense. I mean, it's based that it's not pessimism, it's realism. I mean, I think I challenge this now. This when always now when you oppose the war, enter the realpolitik. No, and I said no, you're naive. And this time, more than ever, you are the utopian. You think that you're going to win this war and expand democracy. Either you're an asshole or you are a really bad person, or maybe both. Because of course, this is after the only because of after the nuclear period, when a nuclear power, in this case, most directly Russia, is, it's what they call faces an existential threat. you are playing with extermination, the possibility of that. So what is realist about this? That you are so clever that you, because your game theory calculations prove that they won't use it, that it's a bluff. And we have to witness if you win the game, die in case you lose. It's absolutely non-rational. That's the point. That the whole Western, because we know how irrational is, I mean the Putin-denken, no? Or Dugin-denken. But we were used to think, or tend to think that we could still dialogue with capitalist liberal reason. It's the end. Since they operate on those terms, it's not enlightenment anymore. And I think Habermas is despairing precisely because of that, because he's trying to call everybody to reason. Hey, hello. No, it's not, because of course, at the matrix of that reason conception or rational conception is capitalist accumulation. And capitalist accumulation is everything but rational now. So that's realism, it's not pessimism. Pessimism would be, what so many leftists use, and I really hate it. We were with Monica and optimism of the will. No. If you don't have a good collective, common, emancipatory reason, your will counts nothing. And it's rather the contrary. Our bodies are fragile. We may die. We may get sick. We can be destroyed by this fascist. But we have the power of reason as a way of transforming the world, not in an idealist. I mean, embodied materialist reason. A common reason, a reason of the common. And that's both realist and optimist, but not pessimist in a way. I mean, I would like to give you personally a better picture, but I'm sorry, I cannot lie so easily. So it's not pessimist, it's what we have to face, because which would be the optimist version of it? No, don't worry, it's just a bluff. It's a Mel Brooks movie in the end. No, it is not. So, well, I would say that on the one hand, there are, we had in Madrid and Spain contact with, in Italy and elsewhere, contact with two different, groupings of Ukrainian activists, artists, for instance, or people operating in the cultural field, and also leftists, no? And I mean that what has happened is that I still have contact with some of them, but they are in exile. I mean, for instance, I had the chance to meet Volodymyr Ishchenko in Frankfurt the other day. He was together with some of the people that now is totally pro-war and totally loyal to the war operation of the Zelensky government and NATO and everything. But some, a minority, think in terms that this is a total disaster. Fact is that mostly of those rather cultural activist composition, they have become fully, I would say, nationalists. But at the same time, they were already knowledgeable and quite articulate about how discourses and arguments operate in Western Europe, in the sense that, as you might have noticed, they use the anti-colonial argument. They say that this is a colonial, anti-colonial struggle for national liberation, that Ukraine was the last European colony. So they are fighting for, and they are criticizing Europe because they don't understand colonialism, because they have still a colonial mentality. Only the US that was born out of an anti-colonial slavery, by the way, but sorry, no, just not important, anti-colonial struggle. And for instance, I don't want to give names, but one of these comrades has just written a piece on foreign policy with that argument. Only the US understands national revolutionary war. Europeans have fear of revolutionary war. Berlin, Paris, so NATO and Washington is the main force for this. So, I mean, I could criticize for hours that position. I think is, bullshit. But they are in the right to defend because they are under an aggression. They decided to commit themselves to that national effort. I think they are mistaken, but I cannot think in their place about what should I do if I am invaded. But there are another composition that I would think that it is even more strikingly paradoxical to me, which is a group or some groups. I talk about that in the book, mostly revolutionary, socialist revolutionary group with Trotskyists and anarchists. It's called Sozialny Ruch, social movement. That considered this also an anti-colonial national liberation struggle, but from the point of view, those of you who know the traditional discussions about the relationship between democratic revolution, national, anti-colonial, and socialist revolution, no? The Trotskyists always said, no, there are no two faces. In order to achieve socialist revolution, the proletarian forces have to be leaders of both. And first we need to be the leaders of the national revolution, and then, once in power, to start class struggle against our own national and international bourgeoisie and start socialism. Okay, but this happens in a situation in which, on the one hand, there are very few people, I mean, very few people, like several thousands. They are not militarily autonomous, and they are operating, as you said, in an anti-communist, anti-trade union, full neoliberal context. If something defines the Ukrainian situation now is that those tendencies that I have pointed out have developed into what many have called a war neoliberalism, which means that, I mean, it's recommendations, policies, actual measures taken in order to concentrate resources, financial resources, economic, human resources. To win the war, we have to get rid of welfare and any remaining welfare, labor rights, and social spending in the country. This also has to do with the foster of privatization that after the brief suspension that happened between February and April, as you know, the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce says Ukraine is the greatest construction site of the world, in the sense that it's a land of provision, of prosperity for international investment. This means that the war effort accompanies the destruction of any labor rights whatsoever, which I don't understand. How are you going to be the leaders of such a revolution if only by military force? But being so very few, how are you going to become leaders of that? Leaders not only with them, also with the illegalized trade unions, with the illegalized left parties. There are no left parties anymore in Ukraine. left or real left or just in name. So it is a total anti-communist, anti-trade union, anti-labor environment. But in spite of that, we cannot fall into the trap of declaring them as enemies or whatsoever. So it's a very awful situation, but I would like to keep in contact. Fact is that the few interactions I have had since I started to write and discuss, that might be the case for you. In Eastern Europe, NATO is a revolutionary force. I still digesting those statements, but I try to keep in contact. Yeah. About which is the main actor, I would start by the beginning. Wherever you are, be it a Trotskyist party, an autonomous collective, a climate activist, you yourself and with friends, and you have to think over which is the best tool. And the best tool is always something that is defined by the goal you want to achieve, by the compositions, social, political, transnational, you have to deal with. And on the basis of that, it is about a trial and error process. So it means that maybe in some situations, a strong party that wins the elections and helps diffusing, sabotaging the war effort is something worth of participating in. At the same time, in some situations, being against a reformist or Stalinist party and be autonomous and being able to, for instance, to organize a general strike is the best tool. And on the basis of that learning process, of that transnational discussion, we may achieve to a more adequate form. It is true that it's not a question that we can solve in advance, because dogmatic principles like only anarchist communes can achieve this. Yeah, okay, but so how do you defeat your war regime when they are putting you into prison, when you don't have an appeal to the law, a recourse to the law, when you have no access to the media to talk with? So being dogmatic is the worst. It is about trial and error and see in every situation, but at the same time you have to interconnect all the time, discuss the lessons, discuss the experiences, discuss defeats and victories, and being able to synthesize new forms of organization from the point of view of attack, but also from the point of view of organization of production, cooperatives, municipalities, networks of production, in agriculture, in manufacturing, in care work, education, health. It is to be tried and it is to be organized transnationally. So I mean, I have no lessons to give. I want to practice. The sooner the better. This is a war against the South, and they are, from the beginning of the pandemic, after the beginning of the war, we've seen food prices in everywhere, but in Africa, devastating of prime food, nutritional needs. Of course, there is a war for a plundering war for resources, mineral in Africa, and so on and so on. We see that at stake is that spaces of accumulation. So I think that from the point of view of the autocratic, oligarchic African governments, and some Latin American leaders, of course, they are right to oppose the war, but they are absolutely mistaken about seeing in Russia something other than an imperial project or this attempt, as I said, of become a center of the world system on the basis of an autocratic, authoritarian, and always more, I would say, proto-fascist approach, because we've seen the development of the narratives that were like latent before the war and have fully developed about the degeneration, no, decadence, no, and you know, the globalists have a coalition of trans people, homosexuals, drug addicts, Jews, capitalists. It is absolutely proto-fascist, and this idea of multipolarity based on civilizational clashes is the symmetric correspondence of for instance, Huntington idea of now the Western world that is threatened by Islamists, and they are absolutely anti-South because Islam is a threat, because Africa is underdeveloped. You cannot compare that with the magnificent Russian culture, and so on and so on. So it might be tactically correct, but politically it's a disaster, because you know, see what does the Wagner group do in the Sahel? The same the French army does, and so on, or the jihadists. So it is about also, this is a question also for the subaltern classes in Africa, in Latin America. It's not just an European question, in the sense that the peace is not just an argument in favor of a good negotiation with Russia. It is about the end of the North and South divide, inequality divide, and of course the beginning of a transnational revolutionary process because of the emergencies that have it already there. Because when we speak of the collapse, the catastrophe, no, it's already happening. It's there. It's not just it's a non-linear process, but it's a process that is already happening and getting to tipping points. So it is something absolutely urgent, both in Latin America and I mean in the global South. But it's a problem. You're right, because that's a problem that a transnational organization has to put to themselves. They need both in every region of the world to advance against the war regime and advance in terms of emancipation, because we'll see the effects of it, of food scarcity. We're really seeing it, but also, for instance, what is happening now inside the capitalist globalization, which is the regionalization of cost, of course, of Europe, with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the CHIP Acts. Volkswagen might go to the US. Other companies, European companies, because they have fiscal benefits and so on. It is about renationalizing and regionalizing the world markets, isolating China and others, and of course resubordinating Europe, and a totally declared recolonization of Africa and Latin America because of the financial, technological, and human effects of that transformation. Because of course this is a rewiring of financial flows, of money, where is money going on, and so on and so on. So I think that I mean and we know what Modi means in India as a supremacist, proto-fascist, anti-non-Hindu millions of peoples that inhabit the Indian state and so on, and war with Pakistan, which is, by the way, also a nuclear power, and so on. So this has to go beyond a re-edition of the Bandung Conference, in the sense of these authoritarian governments that wanted to get out of the Cold War. No, it is about, something that is more alike to the Zapatistas' proposal, to the World Social Forum proposals about transnational cooperation between subaltern classes than something of that kind. Yeah, Wagenknecht is a nationalist, is a supremacist. So for her, I think her concern is the well-being of the German folk, and that's bullshit. So as long as that is considered a left position, we have to dispute the hegemony that they might conquer. I think it's totally unacceptable that precisely because this is not just about peace, but about ending with colonial Eurocentric capitalism, that those positions are unacceptable because they are anti-migration and so on and so on.
I think you have it all.
Okay.
I think you have it all. Thank you very much. This was a courageous round. We are coming to 9 o'clock. I mean, we started a little bit later, but if nobody has something really burning in their tongue, I pose your last question, and then we close for today. Is it okay?
Okay.
I mean, it's going to be a complicated question, but along the lines of what Eb said before, or his question, this debate, global south, global north. I mean, here in Vienna, the moment the war in Ukraine started and people started coming and arriving as well, it was quite evident, and we had to deal with people from African Ukraine that were stuck at the border, that couldn't cross out of the border, get out of the war zone, and that, of course, were not given any special provisions, at least not the same permission to stay in Austria as Ukrainian refugees. At the same time, now the warmongers, as you correctly call them, keep claiming a European identity. And I believe, I'm actually pretty sure, that the war in Ukraine kind of visualized what kind of European identity they think of, because it's a white identity. And the particularity of all this is that even Eastern Europeans, for a very long time, until the Ukraine war, I claim now provocatively, were not considered Europeans. They were the cheap labor force coming from the East. Mm-hmm. So what do we do? How do we even have a chance of creating a European identity we could live with? Or do we dump it and do something else?
No, I think we still need to fight for Europe, but of course, a hybrid, monstrous Europe, in the sense of open to all kind of a very wide membrane Europe, closing doors to fascists and colonialists and opening to every other forces. But because Europe is already that, just we have to take a look at this. We are living in a post-colonial Europe, which means that there is no homogeneous European population as such. There is no European folk whatsoever. It is time to make that reality a political constitution, in the sense of Europe doesn't define itself as a nation. Mm-hmm. It is not composed of nations, it's composed of multitudes. And it is not a white continent. It is a revolutionary process that is becoming world. Mm-hmm. Europe must become world. And in that sense, it is already world. Just main thing I always think about, particularly the most civilized republican identity, which is the French nation républicaine. There is no religion, no race, no whatsoever. We know that's bullshit, because there are millions and millions of French nationals that are considered aborigines, colonial people, that are a threat to the republic. And that's apartheid. I don't want to talk about apartheid because it would take, but apartheid is the most likely mode of governance of that. Mm-hmm. And apartheid means degrees of citizenship. And Ukrainians, if they behave, they will be, of course, not like us, because von der Leyen would say, please, wait. You have, but of course not like Russians, not like Palestinians, not like black African people. Regulating the reality of the world system economy, of world system flows, on the basis of hierarchization, on the basis of the governance of differences of political rights, economic income, mobility. That's the method, as Sandro, our common friend Sandro, the method of the border. And the attempt is to extend that border of rights, of entitlement, of affiliation, way to the West. But what happened with Poland? You said it.
Yes,
You must remember that the Polish workers were like, colonials. Yeah, they're white, but they are not like us. Because it wasn't the moment for that. It was a moment of still just after the Soviet collapse, and it was about dealing with them like very, very cheap work. This is different. This is as von der Leyen says, a civilizational neo-imperial project. And you have to be magnificent with the obedient and cruel and intolerant with the disobedient to that rule. And I'm absolutely convinced that the treatment of Ukrainians will change. At one point there will be, you're asking too much, you don't integrate, you are not really Western, and please behave. And of course there will be again a new opportunity for the far right to profit from the situation. So of course we can, the same we cannot renounce to peace, we cannot absolutely renounce to Europe. We have to dispute that. Europe is also the continent of great anti-colonial struggles. Remember, the Algerian War had a French dimension. The civil war in Spain was also a civil war against Spanish colonialism in the Maghreb, and so on and so on. And Europe was also Russia and the Soviet Union at some point in the communist project. It wasn't Western Europe. So, of course, I don't want to quote de Gaulle, a Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, but he was, because it was a Europe of the people, of the folk, but of course a Europe of the multitudes, and a Europe that will dilute, that should vanish, because it's becoming world. It should be just archive, but we cannot renounce to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I just want to say two things. First thing, die Redakteurin Katrin Niedermoser, jetzt habe ich mir den Namen aufgeschrieben, hat Tagebücher hinten hingelegt, die ihr euch bitte mitnehmen könnt, wenn ihr wollt. Zweite Sache, es gibt also Bücher, die sind so teilweise grau, teilweise bunt. Ein Buch wollte ich euch noch ins Herz legen, Der Haushalt als Versuchslabor von der Lucy Caballero und Veronica Gago, zwei argentinischen feministischen Sozialwissenschaftlerinnen. Gestern war ja 8. März.